Well, here we are at the Galactic Military Academy on Vorthak Prime, and let me tell you, this place makes boot camps across the galaxy look like luxury spas. The Academy sits on a chunk of rock so hostile that even the moss has developed teeth, which honestly should have been our first warning about what kind of operation they were running here. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds, and those shadows were about to witness something that would become legend. Not that anyone expected it, mind you. Especially not when they saw what crawled out of the transport shuttle that day. Entered Drill Sergeant Moran. Now, when I say this Keth Hari was big, I mean he made mountains look inadequate. Standing at 9 feet of pure muscle and bad attitude, with skin like armored plating and teeth that could open cans, Moran had built quite the reputation. The cadets from 17 different species had tried to survive his training. Most ended up requesting transfers to accounting divisions within the first week. Moran did not just train recruits. No, that would be too simple, too boring. Moran broke them down into their component parts, then rebuilt them into something resembling soldiers. Or at least, that was the theory. In practice, he mostly just broke them. The other instructors gave him a wide berth, which should tell you something. When beings who wrestle space bears for fun avoid you, maybe you have anger management issues. But hey, the Academy kept him around because he got results. Brutal. Therapy requiring results, but results nonetheless. So there Moran stood, watching the latest batch of recruits stumble off the transport. His 4 eyes scanned the group with the enthusiasm of a predator selecting dinner. Behind him, the training facility loomed like something designed by a committee of sadists with architectural degrees. The new recruits were the usual mix. A few Zephyrians trying to look tough despite having the bone density of paper. Some Grok warriors who figured military service would be easier than hunting void whales. A handful of other species, all convinced they had what it took to become elite soldiers. Then there was Amy Kowalski. Now, I should mention that humans had only recently joined the Galactic Federation. Most species knew them as those weird mammals from the third rock orbiting an unremarkable star. They had this strange habit of surviving things that should have killed them, but everyone figured that was just luck. Amy stood about 5.5 feet tall, which made her roughly the size of a Keth Hari child. Her skin had that pale pink hue that made other species wonder if she was suffering from some kind of medical condition. Brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without much concern. The other cadets took one look at her and immediately started placing bets on how long she would last. The Grok warrior next to her, a specimen named Throk, who could bench press small vehicles, actually chuckled. "Look at the little soft thing," he rumbled to his companion. "I give her maybe 2 hours before she is crying for her mother." A Zephyrian cadet named Brandon Torres, who at least had the decency to keep his voice down, whispered to another recruit, "Humans are supposed to be tough? She looks like she would break if you sneezed on her too hard." The commentary continued as more cadets noticed their newest squad mate, soft pink thing, became the popular descriptor, along with various predictions about how quickly she would wash out. The general consensus was that Drill Sergeant Moran would eat her alive, probably literally. And Amy, for her part, seemed completely oblivious to the discussion surrounding her. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, looking around the facility with what could only be described as casual interest. Not nervous interest, not terrified interest, just casual interest. Like she was touring a historical site rather than preparing to enter what many considered the closest thing to hell without actual damnation. This should have been their first clue that something was off. Moran finished his inspection of the grounds and turned his attention to the fresh meat. His massive form cast a shadow over the entire group as he approached, and you could practically hear sphincters tightening across multiple species. "Welcome, maggots," his voice boomed across the courtyard, carrying the kind of authority that made mountains reconsider their positions. "To the Galactic Military Academy. Some of you think you are warriors. Some of you think you are tough. Some of you," his gaze lingered on Amy for just a moment, "are about to learn exactly how wrong you are." The traditional welcome ceremony was about to begin. Dawn broke over Vorthak Prime like a slap to the face, which was fitting because that is exactly what the next few hours would feel like for everyone involved. The training grounds had been designed by someone who clearly believed that suffering built character, and if a little suffering was good, then a lot of suffering was fantastic. Moran stood at the center of the obstacle course, arms crossed, looking like a statue dedicated to the concept of intimidation. The morning air carried the scent of fear and inadequacy, mostly from the alien cadets who were beginning to realize they might have made some poor life choices. "Listen up, maggots," Moran bellowed, his voice carrying across the compound with the subtlety of a meteor impact. "Today we separate the warriors from the weaklings. Today we find out who has what it takes, and who should be shuffled off to administrative duties where the biggest danger is paper cuts." His four eyes swept across the assembled recruits before settling on Amy with obvious intent. "You human, front and center. Now." Amy stepped forward without hesitation, which already marked her as different from the Zephyrian cadet, who had literally fainted when Moran looked at him too hard yesterday. She maintained that same casual expression, as if she had been called up to receive an award rather than become the day's primary target for humiliation. "What is your name, soft thing?" Moran asked, leaning down until his massive head was level with hers. His breath could have wilted flowers, if flowers were stupid enough to grow on Vorthak Prime. "Amy Kowalski, Drill Sergeant," she replied in a tone so level it could have been used to calibrate measuring equipment. "Well, Amy Kowalski, you are about to learn what real training looks like. Everyone form up. We start with the basic endurance course." Now, when Moran said basic endurance course, what he meant was an obstacle course designed by a committee of sadists who had clearly been having a very creative day. There were walls to climb that would challenge professional mountaineers, pits filled with substances that smelled like they came from the wrong end of something very large, and weighted packs that could double as anchors for small spacecraft. The alien cadets looked at the course with the kind of expression usually reserved for viewing natural disasters. Brock, the Grok warrior who had been so confident the day before, swallowed hard enough that his throat clicked. The Zephyrians began making what sounded suspiciously like prayers to their various deities. Amy looked at the course like she was reading a lunch menu. "Move out," Moran roared. What happened next defied several laws of physics and at least 3 concepts of common sense. While the other cadets struggled, wheezed, and in some cases actively wept their way through the obstacles, Amy Kowalski moved through that course like it was a pleasant morning jog. The wall that left Throck hanging like a confused ornament? Amy went over it in 4 smooth movements, barely breathing hard. The pit that had claimed 2 Zephyrians and required rescue operations? She crossed it in 3 bounds that would have made gravity feel inadequate about its performance. The weighted pack that was supposed to slow everyone down to a crawl? Amy strapped it on and actually picked up speed, as if the extra weight was helping her maintain momentum. The other cadets watched in growing amazement as this soft pink thing made their best efforts look like amateur hour at the gym. Moran's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something that might have been concern if he had been capable of such emotions. This was not going according to plan. The plan involved the human breaking down, crying, and providing an example to the others about the importance of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. Instead, Amy finished the course in record time and stood waiting for further instructions while the other cadets were still trying to figure out how to approach the first obstacle without dying. Again, Moran growled, clearly hoping this had been some kind of fluke. Amy shrugged and ran the course again, faster this time. By the 3rd run, Moran's mood had shifted from confusion to irritation to something approaching rage. His pride, built over years of breaking supposedly tough recruits, was taking hits like a spacecraft in a meteor storm. The other instructors had started gathering to watch, which made everything worse. "You think you are special, human?" Moran snarled, stepping closer to Amy as she finished her 4th perfect run. "You think being fast makes you tough?" "Not particularly, Drill Sergeant," Amy replied with that same maddening calm. "Just doing what you asked." That was it. That was the moment when Moran's professional demeanor finally snapped like a cheap cable under too much tension. In front of 17 cadets, 4 instructors, and 1 very surprised maintenance worker, as Drill Sergeant Moran grabbed Amy Kowalski by the shoulders and slammed her to the ground with enough force to crack the reinforced concrete beneath her. The sound echoed across the training grounds like thunder. Dust rose from the impact site. Several cadets took involuntary steps backward, and Brandon Torres made a sound like air leaking from a punctured tire. For a moment, everything was silent except for the settling dust and the distant sound of someone's worldview crumbling. Then Amy Kowalski stood up, brushed the dust off her uniform with casual efficiency, and looked at Moran with an expression that had shifted from calm to something considerably more dangerous. "Well," she said in that same level tone, "that was rude." The silence that followed Amy's comment stretched longer than a Zephyrian diplomatic speech, and roughly twice as uncomfortable. Moran stood there, all 9 feet of supposedly intimidating warrior, and looking down at this human who had just casually dismissed being body slammed into concrete like it was a minor social inconvenience. "Rude?" Moran repeated, his voice carrying the kind of disbelief usually reserved for discovering your pet had learned to speak and was criticizing your life choices. "You call that rude?" Amy tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question with academic interest. "Well, let me see. You grabbed me without permission, slammed me into the ground with what I assume was meant to be significant force, and did it in front of an audience." She paused to brush another speck of dust from her sleeve. "Yes, I would definitely classify that as rude behavior." The other cadets exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing something that would either become legend or get them all court-martialed as accessories. Throck's mouth hung open wide enough to park a small vehicle, while Brandon Torres looked like he was trying to calculate the odds of surviving what was about to happen. Moran's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. In his experience, beings who got slammed into concrete usually stayed there and made whimpering sounds, not delivered social commentary. "You want to see rude, human? I will show you what rude really looks like." "Oh, please do," Amy replied with the kind of polite interest usually reserved for museum tours. "I am always eager to expand my cultural understanding." That was the moment when something shifted in Amy's posture. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed warning to beings who had not spent their evolutionary history as persistence hunters on a death world. Just a subtle redistribution of weight, a slight adjustment in stance that somehow made her look less like a harmless pink thing and more like something that might have opinions about being body slammed. Moran charged. Now, when a 9-foot Kethari warrior charges at you, the standard response across most of the galaxy is to run, hide, or update your will. The Kethari had not become one of the dominant military species by being gentle. They were built for war, designed by evolution to be living weapons, and trained from birth to win fights through superior strength and intimidation. Amy Kowalski stepped to the side, not dramatically. Not with any flashy moves that would have looked good in a holo vid. She just moved exactly the right distance at exactly the right time, and Moran thundered past her like a freight train that had missed its station. "Strike 1, Amy said conversationally as Moran skidded to a stop and spun around with the grace of an angry mountain. The second charge came faster with more calculation. Moran had fought opponents who tried to dodge before. He spread his massive arms wide, intending to catch Amy no matter which direction she moved. Amy dropped down, swept his legs, and sent all 9 feet of trained warrior crashing to the ground with an impact that registered on seismic equipment 3 facilities over. "Strike 2, she announced as Moran struggled to get back up, his dignity taking more damage than his body. "You know where I come from, 3 strikes usually means you are out." By now, word was spreading faster than gossip at a diplomatic reception. Instructors were abandoning their classes to witness the impossible sight of Drill Sergeant Moran getting schooled by something that looked like it should be asking for directions to the gift shop. Lieutenant Korax, a veteran instructor who had seen Moran break recruits from species that could bench press starships, He watched with the kind of fascination usually reserved for witnessing new forms of physics. "Is she actually fighting him?" he asked Commander Tellux, who was standing nearby with his mouth hanging open. "I think," Commander Tellux replied slowly, "she is playing with him." Moran hauled himself upright, his armor like skin scraped, and his pride in considerably worse condition. The logical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through countless battles, was sending urgent messages about tactical withdrawal and reassessment. The emotional part of his brain, the part that had been professionally humiliated in front of witnesses, told the logical part to shut up and sit down. "You got lucky, human," he growled, circling Amy like a predator. Which, from Amy's perspective, probably looked more like a very large, very angry pet going through some kind of behavioral episode. "Twice?" Amy asked, raising an eyebrow. "That seems statistically unlikely. Maybe you should consider that this is not luck." The third charge was different. Moran had abandoned strategy in favor of raw fury, throwing everything he had into one overwhelming assault designed to end this humiliation permanently. He came at Amy with the kind of violence that had made Kethari warriors feared across 17 star systems. Amy caught his punch. Not deflected. Not avoided. Caught. Her small human hand wrapped around his massive fist and stopped it dead, as if she had just casually reached out and grabbed a falling leaf. For a moment they stood frozen in tableau, the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. Then Amy smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that suggested someone was about to learn something they probably did not want to know. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for decades to come. Amy shifted her grip, used Moran's own momentum against him, and sent the 9-foot warrior flying through the air in a perfect arc that ended with him creating a Moran-shaped crater in the ground some 15 feet away. The impact was loud enough to bring Admiral Vashi running from his office, his metals jangling with each step as he tried to identify what kind of explosion had just occurred on his training grounds. Amy stood over the crater, hands on her hips, looking down at Moran with the patient expression of a teacher waiting for a slow student to work through a difficult problem. "Strike 3, she said pleasantly. "Though technically I think that was more of a home run." Admiral Vashi arrived just in time to witness Drill Sergeant Moran crawling out of his own impact crater, looking like he had been personally introduced to the concept of gravity by someone who really wanted to make sure he understood it thoroughly. The Admiral looked at the crater, looked at Amy, looked at the assembled crowd of cadets and instructors who were all trying to process what they had just witnessed, and made the kind of executive decision that separates good commanders from great ones. "Someone," he said in a voice that carried the authority of rank and the wisdom of experience, "please explain to me why there is a Moran-sized hole in my training ground." The medical team arrived with the kind of urgency usually reserved for natural disasters, their equipment beeping and whirring as they descended on the crater like technicians trying to repair a particularly complex piece of broken machinery. Chief Medical Officer Zalthar, a being whose species had evolved specifically to deal with traumatic injuries, took one look at the impact site and immediately began updating his insurance claims. "Is he alive?" Admiral Vashi asked, peering into the crater where Moran was being systematically scanned by devices that looked like they belonged in a starship repair bay. "Alive, yes," Zalthar replied, his tone suggesting this was more surprising than medically encouraging. "Conscious, mostly. Dignity, completely absent. His pride appears to have suffered catastrophic structural failure." Moran groaned something that might have been words if words were allowed to be that incoherent, while the medical team worked to extract him from his personalized geological feature. The process involved anti-grav stretchers, structural support beams, and what appeared to be a small excavation crew. Admiral Vashi turned his attention to Amy, who was standing nearby with the relaxed posture of someone waiting for a bus, rather than someone who had just converted a legendary drill sergeant into a landscape modification. "Cadet Kowalski," the Admiral said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to escalate an already bizarre situation. "Would you care to explain how you managed to relocate Drill Sergeant Moran with such efficiency?" Amy shrugged, a gesture so casual it made several onlookers question their understanding of cause and effect. Basic human physiology, sir. We are built for endurance hunting, persistence tracking, and what our instructors back home called aggressive problem solving. Aggressive problem solving? Admiral Vashi repeated, glancing at the crater where Moran was being carefully extracted like an archaeological specimen. Well, Drill Sergeant Moran presented a problem, Amy explained with the patience of someone discussing weather patterns. He was being unprofessional, violent, and frankly quite rude. So I solved the problem using standard human conflict resolution techniques. Commander Tom Malley, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, had stepped forward with a datapad in his hands and the expression of someone who had just connected several very concerning dots. As the human liaison officer, it was his job to understand his species' representatives, but Amy Kowalski was making that job significantly more complicated. Admiral, Commander Malley said, his voice carrying the tone of someone about to deliver news that would require additional paperwork. I have been reviewing Cadet Kowalski's file, and there are some details that might be relevant to this situation. Such as? Admiral Vashi asked, though his tone suggested he was not entirely sure he wanted to know. Humans are classified as Death World survivors, sir. Their home planet, Earth, is considered a Class 12 hazardous environment. The fact that they evolved there at all is considered something of an anomaly by xenobiological standards. The assembled cadets exchanged glances that suggested their worldview was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable reconstruction. Throck, who had been so confident about human fragility, was staring at Amy like she had just revealed herself to be made of exotic matter. Death World? Brandon Torres whispered to the Zephyrian next to him. What does that mean, Death World? Commander Malley consulted his datapad with the thoroughness of someone reading a manual for defusing explosives. It means their planet actively tries to kill them on a regular basis. Predators, natural disasters, atmospheric variations, geological instability, and weather patterns that would be classified as weapons of mass destruction on most civilized worlds. Amy nodded helpfully. Home sweet home, she said with obvious fondness. Though I always thought the hurricanes were a bit much. Furthermore, Commander Malley continued, clearly working through the file in real time, Cadet Kowalski comes from a military family with an extensive service record. Her father served in the Human Colonial Marine Corps. Her mother was a combat engineer. And her grandfather was apparently involved in something called the Battle of Thermopylae Pass, though the details are classified at a level that makes me uncomfortable. Admiral Vashi absorbed this information with the expression of someone discovering their new pet was actually an apex predator. And her personal training background? Mixed martial arts champion, endurance racing competitor, and she holds certifications in what humans call Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and something listed here as advanced unpleasantness. Commander Malley paused. I am not entirely sure what that last one involves, but given current evidence, I suspect it is accurately named. Amy looked pleased by the attention. I just wanted to serve in the Galactic Military and maybe see some new places. Mom always said travel broadens the mind and builds character. By this point, you aimed. The medical team had successfully extracted Moran from his crater and were loading him onto a transport with the care usually reserved for handling unstable explosives. As they prepared to leave, Moran managed to lift his head and look at Amy with something that might have been respect if it was not so thoroughly mixed with confusion and residual terror. Human, he managed to say, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had just discovered religion through personal revelation. What are you? Amy considered the question with the thoughtfulness it deserved. Persistent, she said finally. We are very, very persistent. Admiral Vashi watched the medical team disappear with his former drill sergeant, then looked at the crater, then looked at Amy, then made the kind of command decision that would either be remembered as brilliant leadership or spectacular career suicide. Cadet Kowalski, he said with the authority of someone who had decided to embrace the inevitable, report to my office in 1 hour. We need to discuss your new role in this academy. Yes, sir. Amy replied cheerfully. Should I bring anything special? Admiral Vashi looked at the crater one more time, then back at Amy. Just yourself, Cadet. I have a feeling that is going to be more than enough. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Military Academy on Vorthak Prime looked remarkably similar to how it had always looked, except for the small memorial plaque marking the spot where Drill Sergeant Moran had achieved temporary fusion with the local geology. The plaque read Moran Memorial Crater, a testament to the importance of professional courtesy, which was Admiral Vashi's idea of institutional humor. Moran himself had recovered, though recovery was perhaps too strong a word for what had actually occurred. He had achieved a state of functional operation, like a piece of equipment that works perfectly well but makes strange noises and occasionally displays error messages that no one quite understands. The strangest part was his attitude toward Amy Kowalski. He barked across the training grounds, his voice carrying its usual authority, but with an undertone that sounded suspiciously like respect. Show these maggots how to properly execute a tactical role without looking like they are having seizures. Amy jogged over with that same easy gait that had become legendary among the cadets. Over the past weeks, she had somehow transitioned from target of humiliation to unofficial combat instructor, a role that she filled with the same casual competence she brought to everything else. Certainly, Drill Sergeant, she replied, then addressed the struggling cadets with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching. The key is not to fight gravity. Use it, work with it, make it your friend instead of your enemy. She demonstrated the movement with fluid grace, turning what had been a complex military maneuver into something that looked almost like dancing. The cadets watched with the attention usually reserved for religious ceremonies, though in this case they were witnessing something equally transformative. See? Amy said, brushing dust from her uniform. Physics is not optional, but it can be negotiable if you approach it correctly. Brandon Torres, who had gone from barely tolerating his human squadmate to following her around like a devoted student, nodded enthusiastically. The Zephyrian had discovered that Amy's friendship came with unexpected benefits, including protection from the more aggressive cadets and access to training techniques that actually worked. Amy, he said, using the informal name she had insisted everyone adopt, can you show us that thing you did yesterday with the balance beam? The thing where I made it look easy, or the thing where I explained why everyone else was making it hard? Amy asked with a grin. Both, replied Throck, who had undergone the most dramatic transformation of anyone. The Grok warrior had gone from dismissing Amy as soft pink weakness to treating her like some kind of tactical genius. His warrior culture had adapted quickly to the concept that strength came in forms they had not previously considered. The ripple effects of Amy's integration into the academy had spread far beyond the training grounds. General Kraftnog, the academy commander, he had spent considerable time reviewing Amy's methods and had come to some disturbing conclusions about traditional galactic military training protocols. Commander Mali, General Kraftnog said during their weekly briefing, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had discovered their carefully constructed worldview had some significant gaps. I have been analyzing the performance metrics since Cadet Kowalski joined the program. Commander Mali, who had been expecting this conversation for weeks, consulted his data pad with the enthusiasm of someone reading his own obituary. Yes, sir, our traditional training methods, the ones we have used successfully for centuries, are producing soldiers who are approximately 40% less effective than what we achieve when we incorporate human techniques. The general paused, allowing this information to settle like debris after an explosion. How is this possible? Human evolutionary psychology, sir, Commander Mali replied, grateful to finally have answers that made sense. They developed on a world where everything was trying to kill them, so they learned to be efficient, adaptable, and persistent. Their training methods reflect survival strategies rather than dominance displays. General Kraftnog absorbed this with the expression of someone reconsidering fundamental assumptions about reality, and Cadet Kowalski has been promoted to senior cadet and given official training responsibilities. The other cadets have shown remarkable improvement under her instruction. Indeed, Amy's new role as assistant combat instructor had transformed the academy's approach to training. Instead of breaking cadets down through intimidation and overwhelming force, she built them up through understanding and practical application of physics, biology, and what she cheerfully called common sense. Remember, Amy told a group of struggling Zephyrian cadets, "You are not trying to be stronger than physics. You are trying to be smarter than the situation. Use leverage, use timing, use your opponent's momentum against them." She demonstrated by casually flipping Throck over her shoulder, sending the massive Grok warrior tumbling across the mat with a grace that made it look choreographed. Throck bounced back up with a grin, no longer embarrassed by being thrown by someone a third his size. See? Size matters, but technique matters more, and persistence matters most of all. The Academy's new training protocols, officially designated as Integrated Human Combat Philosophy, had begun attracting attention from military academies across the galaxy. Representatives from 17 different species had requested copies of the curriculum, though General Kraftnog suspected they were missing the point. The protocols were not just about combat techniques. They were about a fundamental shift in thinking, from viewing training as a process of weeding out the weak to viewing it as a process of making everyone stronger. As the sun set over Vorthak Prime, Amy stood on the observation deck, watching the latest group of cadets practice the techniques she had taught them. They moved with confidence now, species that had traditionally been considered unsuitable for military service, performing maneuvers that would have impressed veteran soldiers. Brandon Torres joined her, along with Throck and several other cadets who had become her informal study group. They watched in comfortable silence as their classmates demonstrated that strength, properly understood, was not about size or intimidation. "You know," Brandon said thoughtfully, "when you first arrived, everyone thought humans were just another species trying to fit in with galactic civilization." Amy nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And now?" "Where?" "Now we realize," Throck rumbled with obvious satisfaction, "that maybe galactic civilization should try to fit in with humans." Amy laughed, the sound carrying across the training grounds where Drill Sergeant Moran was putting a new group of recruits through their paces with methods that emphasized respect, a technique, and the revolutionary concept that soldiers worked better when they were not terrified of their instructors. One human cadet had changed everything, not through conquest or dominance, but through the simple radical act of being herself and showing others that there was more than one way to be strong. The galaxy, as it turned out, was ready to learn.